On this day, 1966, just 3 days from defending his World Heavyweight Boxing Championship, Muhammad Ali visits the set of the classic war movie, The Dirty Dozen.
And we're back, like we never left. Welcome to episode 266 of the Confessions of a Not-So-Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Saturday morning with me here in New York. Once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. Now, I have not done a Muhammad Ali episode in quite some time. So today I've got the shirt. If you even dream of beating me, you better wake up and apologize. Or, as Harvey Keitel famously said in Reservoir Dogs, in one of the great Easter eggs, most people didn't know what he was saying, when Harvey Keitel says to Michael Madsen, Mr. White, to Mr. Blonde, "You shoot me in a dream, you better wake up and apologize." But today is not the anniversary of an Ali fight. That's going to be in 3 days. This is the anniversary of a historical moment which isn't really necessarily that noteworthy or iconic except for the people who are involved and the way that life sometimes puts people in other people's paths, not for any grand reason or that there's a master plan, but just out of convenience. A couple of friends hanging out when they happen to both be in Europe at the same time, and it turns out one of the friends is about to defend the World Heavyweight Championship, and the other friend retired from the NFL to make a movie. On August 3rd, 1966, World Heavyweight Champion Muhammad Ali was 3 days out from making his 5th title defense. So he had defeated Sonny Liston February 25, 1964. He defeated Sonny, and then he beat Sonny in the return match. That was his first title defense. That's the famous, the Phantom Punch, the punch that nobody saw until you slowed it down on tape and said, okay, well, he landed something. But Sonny Liston, you could hit the guy with a 2x4 and he would keep moving forward. That didn't really look like much. So first title defense, Sonny Liston. Then he defeated the guy that Sonny had vanquished twice, Floyd Patterson, really embarrassed him. Then he beat George Chuvalo, one of the toughest men to ever lace up the gloves. And he beat Henry Cooper in a return fight. Now, Henry Cooper was the guy in the fight before, at the time Cassius Clay, got the title shot with Liston. Henry Cooper nearly knocked young Cassius Clay out of the ring. And if he had actually tumbled out of the ring, the fight would have been stopped. Luckily, Henry Cooper landed a home run bomb of a left hook. Young Cassius Clay, 21 at the time, went flying. The two things, his head hit the rope. He didn't go anywhere. And the other thing was the round ended. So Cooper didn't even have an opportunity when Clay jumped up. He didn't have an opportunity to try to finish the fight. But that difficult fight is why Sonny Liston said, you know what? Fuck this kid. Let me fight him. I'll shut him up. Maybe he'll last a couple of rounds. He's cute. He's fast. And what happened was, young Cassius Clay, the best fight that he had had up to that point, and some people would say, from a chess match standpoint, it's comparable to Foreman in Zaire in '74. 22-year-old Cassius Clay put on a masterclass in his dismantling of the seemingly invincible heavyweight champion, Sonny Liston. But the return fight with Henry Cooper, now Muhammad Ali, he really just beat the shit out of him. Cooper didn't have a chance. And even after the fight, Henry, you know, the two guys were friends. When their careers ended, they kept in touch, and they made public appearances together on occasion if Ali was overseas. But Henry Cooper said, guy's even bigger and he was even faster. I thought he was maybe too much for me the first time. I couldn't lay a glove on this guy. And even when I did hit him, nothing happened. Fuck him. So he had successfully defended the title 4 times. And he was set to fight a contender, not as good as the previous 4 that he had defended his title against. A guy who was ranked like 3rd in the heavyweight division named Brian London. And the fight was going to be held at what at the time was known as Earl's Court Arena in London, probably not far from Buckingham Palace. As luck would have it, a major motion picture, a huge legendary, iconic war movie was filming not that far away. And the 24-year-old heavyweight champion of the world saw an opportunity to see a friend that he had not seen in a while. The friend was Jim Brown, the famous football player who retired from the NFL to make this movie, this famous movie, which you've heard of, called The Dirty Dozen. It just happened to work out that way. So 3 days before he was scheduled to defend his World Heavyweight Championship against Brian London, he visited the set of The Dirty Dozen. And even though at the time, one of the reasons why he was in London is because there was about to be an enormous problem with Vietnam and with the fact that he hadn't been drafted yet, but the drums were starting to beat that there was going to be a problem here because he was going to be reclassified, so he would be up for the draft, and he was starting to become unpopular. A lot of people didn't like the fact that he changed his name in the first place. Like, what's he doing? And there was an idea that he's going to get drafted and this is going to be very, very bad. Nobody's going to end up looking good. So he didn't flee, but he went and he defended his title overseas. It wasn't an accident that he was almost on like a European tour. And his next fight after that, was it the Mildenberger fight? Yeah. So he stayed over there. No need to ruffle any feathers at home. Let's just do our business and fight some of the top guys and the toughest men in the world. And Mildenberger was a fucking bruiser. He was like a little guy by heavyweight standards, but man, that guy was tough. He actually was, of all the guys that Ali fought in his first iteration, after the first Liston fight, Mildenberger actually took a couple of rounds off him, even though he was knocked down 3 times. But that's how much better first generation Ali was than anyone else, that when he lost a round, it was a big deal. People used to say the same thing about Roy Jones Jr. when Roy was at his peak. Most of his fights were just not competitive. It was very difficult to square Roy Jones up. And especially at middleweight, even when he got hit, it didn't seem to do anything. It wasn't until he ascended the weight classes that he started to have blows tell on him, because his best weight was probably middleweight. But in this instance, he was overseas and he had the opportunity to go to the set of The Dirty Dozen. And even though there were people in the United States that were like, you know what, let this guy stay over there, he was very popular in Europe. And in general, he was popular everywhere in the world because he was a character. People liked him. Even those who didn't speak the language, they got a kick out of him. He's always smiling. He's cracking wise. He goes out of his way, to meet fans and to be funny. Like, there are certain fighters, and Sonny Liston was one of them. The fans never really warmed him. And George Foreman, young, was also very, very sober and serious. But people like when someone they know can beat the shit out of them in 3 seconds, when that person goes out of their way to make them comfortable, that there is not the threat of violence. Yeah, Mike Tyson, obviously, young Mike Tyson, there was always the threat of violence. Unlike Evander was not opposed to brawling, but only in the ring. Evander Holyfield outside the ring always had a reputation. Oh, he's the nicest guy, because he was aware that the default setting for your normal person is you're going to be a little bit tentative around him. You're going to be a little scared. There was never any threat of violence around first young Cassius Clay and then Muhammad Ali. He went out of his way to try to make people and put them at ease with humor and just his bearing and his manner. So when he got to the set, Jim Brown, was so excited and so happy to see him, and just that this happened to work out. So Ali took pictures with everybody in the cast. He took pictures with Clint Walker, and Clint Walker was an actor who was jacked. Clint Walker was fucking huge. The guy was like 6'6", 250, and didn't look to have a scrap of fat on him. He looked like a football player in 2024, like a Ray Lewis, like somebody who was just so diesel, just humongous. Now, he obviously worked out, but he had the kind of build that he just naturally looked like a genetic mega superior. And he's clowning around Ali, clowning with Telly Savalas, and Lee Marvin. Lee Marvin is the nominal star of the film The Dirty Dozen. You also had John Cassavetes, an all-star cast, and obviously Jim Brown plays a very critical role. Ernest Borgnine in the movie. Borgnine wasn't on set that day. His character was not really one of the group of the so-called Dirty Dozen. Lee Marvin, though, Lee Marvin's an interesting character historically. He was a terrific actor and a great movie star. Lee Marvin was a heavy drinker. He was a heavy drinker. And he had a reputation as somebody that liked to brawl and was not opposed to getting into bar fights with just random strangers anywhere in the world where he happened to be working who pissed him off. He used to just throw down. Now, that's something that wouldn't fly these days, but back then there's a lot of stuff. And from the baseball perspective, Mickey Mantle, fans had no idea that he was getting completely lit every single night. He didn't report on it. Nobody was looking to humiliate or embarrass anybody, but Lee Marvin did have this reputation as somebody that he liked to kind of test himself. He saw himself as really tough, and he's ready to throw down at the drop of a hat. So when the two guys, and there's plenty of pictures, when they shook hands, it wasn't Ali, but somebody there, it could have been Ali's brother, because Ali's brother Rudy was there. Somebody suggested to Lee Marvin, hey Lee, you want to get in the ring with the kid, maybe spar a few rounds? And there's a picture of him cracking up, and I think it was because he had been asked that question, and both he and Ali are laughing, because Marvin basically said, hell to the fucking no, I'm not getting you. What are you, stupid? I might want to take on some random drunk in a bar. I don't want to fight him. So a grand old time was had by all. But you see, even something as innocuous as this, if it happened now, it would be reported differently. People would say, well, no, he went there to see Jim Brown. Now, he and Jim Brown had had a friendship that already went back years. And the movie, the 2020 film, One Night in Miami, directed by Regina King, wonderful film. It won a lot of awards. It was nominated for a couple of Oscars. The friendship between, at the time that movie is set, Cassius Clay and Jim Brown is almost the anchoring point of the entire story. That these guys, super talented, young men of color, brilliant athletes, and each one struggling, and Jim Brown for the rest of his life. This was always a thing, the struggle for equality, the struggle for social justice, how best to go about it. But they were just friends, forgetting all of that stuff. They got each other. They were kindred spirits. Jim Brown was often, and even now when he passed, was often cited as the single greatest football player who ever lived. Jim Brown and Jerry Rice, that's the kind of rarefied air we're talking about. And it's one thing to be, as Lord Andrew Lindsay says in Chariots of Fire, to be a fastest, but not the fastest man ever. In this case, you could be a great football player, but that's not the same as being in the conversation for the greatest ever. And one of the incredible ironies of Muhammad Ali's professional life as an athlete, and he even said this in later years, I was telling everybody I was the greatest before I even thought I was. So him calling himself the greatest, it was as if he was actualizing it, because, I mean, if you ask 100 boxing experts who was the greatest heavyweight of the 20th century, he's going to be named more even than Joe Louis. Probably because the odds would be that he would beat Joe Louis more often than not. But the way this would be reported now would be, is the champ taking Brian London seriously enough? And this would be a whole thing. And if heaven forbid he lost, it would be pointed, well, he shouldn't have been screwing around on the set of The Dirty Dozen, yucking it up with Lee Marvin. And they wouldn't be wrong. It would be like trying to assign blame and searching for a reason why something happened. Nowadays, you don't even want to give people reasons, just like you don't want to give the opposing team, or in this case, the opposing boxer, bulletin board material. There are no bulletin boards. I mean, I guess there still are. It's not like it used to be. But he simply wanted to see his friend. His friend is making a movie and working. And here we are. So he spent a couple of hours on set. They showed him how the kind of fake, well, the guns weren't fake, but the blanks, and this is how we set up, and this is where we, because, there's stuff on the ground that looks like pieces of tape at various areas on the set. He's not a movie person. He later became somebody. He acted in TV, and he played himself in the movie The Greatest. Not that good of a movie. But he's asking questions. Hey, what's going on with these pieces of tape? Oh, those are our marks. So at the beginning of the scene, I start here, and I make my way there. Now, these are things that the average person, why would you ever know? Every once in a while, though, when you're watching a movie, if you notice an actor look down, that's why. There is, and this is one of the, it has nothing to do with anything that I'm talking about, but in the movie Naked Gun 2.5, Leslie Nielsen is looking for his mark a lot of different times in that film. And I thought it was just something that the character of Frank Drebin did, which is that as he approached someone, he just kind of looked down, almost like George Clooney doing that thing where Clooney would have his head down and he would look at people almost through his eyelashes. No, Leslie Nielsen forgot where he was supposed to go. He's looking for his mark. So now that you're aware of this, if you weren't already, although I feel like if you're this far into this episode, you know what I'm talking about. But actors and actresses will occasionally, you'll see their eyes look down and they're looking for their mark. They want to make sure they hit the right spot. So when it was all said and done, Muhammad Ali, formerly Cassius Clay, said goodbye to everyone. They all wished him well. And what we don't know, because everyone was so gracious, from the filmmaker Robert Aldrich to, as I say, Lee Marvin, to Clint Walker, Telly Savalas, John Cassavetes, everyone who he met that day were so gracious. Were they all fans of his? I don't know. I mean, Lee Marvin, to me, is the kind of guy that if he had already had a problem with, he would have said something. I don't know, Lee was just afraid of him. No, I feel like Lee Marvin would have said, hey, I hear that if you get drafted, you're going to cause a problem. Nobody said anything. So he said his goodbyes, wished everyone well, and he, went back to his hotel. And 3 days later, he had what can only be called a command performance, what amounted to a boxing masterclass. He was sharper than ever. And Brian London, tough fighter, I don't even know if he had ever been knocked down in his career. Like, he was not just some tomato can. He was the weakest of Ali's first 5 title defenses, no doubt. He was not as good as either Sonny Liston, Floyd Patterson, George Chuvalo, certainly not Henry Cooper. Henry Cooper was still the British Empire champion. Many people say, certainly before like Anthony Joshua, Lennox Lewis, if you want to say Britain, because Lennox, I know, spent a lot of time in Canada. But Henry Cooper's the answer to the question. Before the guys I just mentioned, who was the greatest heavyweight to ever come out of England? It's Henry Cooper. Henry Cooper was Sir Henry Cooper. He was friends with the royal family. That is how big of a deal Henry Cooper was overseas. Brian London wasn't that big a deal. He was just a contender, got a crack at the title, and the young champion dismantled him. And he was not preoccupied. He wasn't worried about how it looked, that he had taken time out 3 days, that he wasn't still training his ass off every second of the day or stressing over the fight, or I hope London, I've seen footage of Brian and he has a big right hand, like nothing. He went out there and he just took the fight to Brian London. And there is an idea, depending on the kinds of clips and the footage, is everything that every Cassius Clay, Muhammad Ali, every fight, with very few exceptions, maybe a couple of the fights from 1961 or 62, aren't really available. They might just be fragments, like the Lamar Clark fight in 61. But there's an idea that he just kind of circled around the ring, peppered his opponents, made them miss, made them look stupid. In other words, that if you want to compare a contemporary fighter, that he was a counterpuncher like a Terence Crawford. There's nothing wrong with that, because Terence Crawford is an absolute beast. He's already one of the probably 10 greatest ever. I mean, Terence Crawford is absurdly good. So there's nothing wrong with being a counterpuncher, but that's not really what Ali did. It is true that he would take his time. He was never in a rush. He knew that he was going to win rounds when there was no activity, just because he looked good doing whatever he was doing. The ring generalship of Muhammad Ali, #1 in the history of boxing. Nobody did it better. Nobody could win rounds doing less than him. But it is true that he would move around the ring. He would circle. He would sense and try to get an idea of how strong physically his opponent was. They would go in for a clinch, and he would test him. So, okay, this guy's a little stronger than me. We're not going to do this again. Whatever it might be. But his process was not to just fight backing up and counterpunch, especially if he sensed his opponent was not so strong. Then he would be advancing. And in this fight, once he kind of figured out the range, okay, London, his arms aren't quite as long as I thought. If I stay at a certain distance and use the jab, I'm going to be able to just smash this guy with the right. It's basically what happened. And in Ali's kind of storied career, but particularly the first iteration, he made 9 title defenses. This was the 5th of 9. And for somebody who was not known as a big puncher, he was somebody who could hit. You know, he knew how to set himself up to punch, obviously, but he didn't really fully commit. He didn't throw haymakers. He threw short, jolting shots because he didn't want what was coming in return. He had the incredible head movement. He could lean away from jabs better than anybody who ever did it. And he could usually get out of the way of the big shots. But he also knew if he overcommitted, he might get hit. And so he kept the shots short. And this is something that a lot of people talked about with Mike Tyson, that he was at his best when he wasn't throwing home run bombs and Sunday punches. Because Tyson just hit so damn hard, the same kind of punches I'm talking about would do more damage to their opponents. Keep the gloves up and throw short, tight shots. So in the Brian London fight, Ali throws a lot of short, tight shots. He's not fighting backing up. He doesn't want to fuck around. He wants to win the fight and get the hell out of there. But in his 9 title defenses, nobody really knows, but Sonny Liston, technically that's a KO. Because Liston was down for about 25 seconds, either on his own or because his head just spun around so much that he blanked out for 30 seconds. Liston always claimed, I didn't take a dive. Son of a bitch hit me. I don't even remember what the fuck happened. Words to that effect. But he beat Patterson. That was a stoppage. George Chuvalo, nobody ever knocked George Chuvalo down. George Chuvalo went not the distance, but he was in there with George Foreman years later, and Foreman could not knock him down. Prime George Foreman hit the guy with the not even everything but the kitchen sink. He hit him with the kitchen sink, couldn't put him on the canvas. And Henry Cooper, the fight was stopped on cuts. So this fight with Brian London, you may, if you're a fan of boxing, you may have seen a clip on your feed. It's a clip of Ali ending the fight with about 13 punches in 3 seconds. It's something stupid like that. It was a legitimate KO. He hit London because London was already on kind of wobbly legs. He wasn't able to land, and he was getting peppered, and he's the one who was backing up because he knew he was assuming he still had his faculties. He was in big trouble. Ali landed about, as I say, 13 or 14 punches in not much more than a couple of seconds. There are those that say no fighter ever delivered punches as fast as that. Not Floyd Mayweather, not Sugar Ray Leonard, not Prince Nassim, no one. And this guy was 215 pounds, and his punches were delivered with the speed of as fast a featherweight as you can imagine. He was a true unicorn. So he ends up winning this fight. They could have counted to 30. London wasn't making it up. He did. The fight was done. He was finished. And so that was Ali's 5th title defense. And then the Mildenberger fight was halted after the 3rd knockdown. Mildenberger got up, and there was no reason to let the fight continue. He put a great account of himself, but there wasn't any reason to let it go. And he fought Ernie Terrell. And the Cleveland Williams fight, one of his most famous fights, was also not a 10 count, that the ref stopped it. Well, it would have been a 10 count at the end of the 2nd round. Williams was not going to make it up. He was all but knocked unconscious. The bell rang. That was one of those rare times where the rule was the bell could save the fighter, not just in the last round. But if the bell rings and you're on the canvas, the corner can literally come over and scrape you up off the ground. That's what happened in the Williams fight. But anyway, the final title defense of Ali's prime, in which he didn't lose that many rounds, as I said, was the Zora Foley fight, and that also was a conventional KO. He knocked Foley down, then he knocked him down again, And the third knockdown, Foley kind of scrambled and stumbled around. And although I guess technically he was on his feet, the ref waved the fight over. Either Foley got up just as the guy hit 10, or he was stumbling and staggering, and the ref went like that. So out of his 9 title defenses, you could say there were 3 conventional KOs. You know, you look at Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson, some of his best, most dominant performances, they weren't necessarily where the fighter was a 10 count. It was where the ref had to wave it off. The Sammy Scaff fight where he split the guy's face open. My God, that was really something. That showed he was not someone to fuck with. But the Foley fight at Madison Square Garden was the last fight of Prime Ali, and you know, a lot of unbelievable stuff happened after that, which I don't really have time to get into. But I always found it fascinating when people who you wouldn't automatically assume would have ever met, such as Ali and Jim Brown, end up being the best of friends. And Jim Brown even was one of the commentators when Ali fought Foreman in Zaire in '74, the famous Rumble in the Jungle. And Jim Brown was among many people, including Howard Cosell, who considered Ali a friend and didn't want him to take the fight. He said, "Champ, you're going to get killed. You can't beat this guy." No, I guess we'll just have to see if I can't beat this guy. Or maybe he can't beat me. But yes, Ali and Jim Brown stayed friends for certainly the duration of Ali's life. They didn't see each other as much as both guys got older. In Ali's case, the Parkinson's really sort of took hold of him in his later years. It is crazy, though, to ponder 58 years ago today, while filming The Dirty Dozen, in the middle of filming, nothing was interrupted. Most of the time on movie sets, whether it's 2024 or 1966, it's people standing around and sitting around. If you talk to Christopher Nolan, he doesn't want anybody sitting around on the set. He wants them engaged and active, not just chilling out. Muhammad Ali visited the set of what many consider to be a top 3. It's definitely in the top 10, but many have it top 3, top 5. Greatest war movies ever made, The Dirty Dozen. And he was there during filming. Amazing. 58 years ago today. And this has been episode 266 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for joining me this very special Ali and war movie themed episode. It might be the first time that I've mentioned, well, certainly the first time I mentioned Robert Aldrich. But I think the first time I mentioned Lee Marvin too. That notorious boozer and brawler who was a terrific actor and a great movie star. And I'm telling you, Google the pics of Ali and Lee Marvin yucking it up. It's just absolute gold. But if you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, or iTunes, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Until then, peace.